reaction to Ai Weiwei's memoirs, 1,000 Years of Joy and Sorrows. I haven't finished the book yet. I'm about two-thirds into the book, but I want to bring in a little bit of thoughts here before I do the formal review after I read the book. Just for new listeners, I usually do a recap of what I'm reading, and I do this for two reasons. One is to keep a record, and second also to emphasize how important reading is, how important the conditioning of the mind is, which this is basically what I consider reading is. So reading is not just a pastime, it is part of the business of a hedge fund manager. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So running a hedge fund and reading and conditioning your mind, which is what reading really is absolutely key, and that's why we do these reviews. So Ai Weiwei, 1,000 Years of Joy and Sorrows, his memoirs, a very interesting artist out of China. And yeah, let's get into it. This is an Not Even Wrong podcast, January 20th, 2022. Crimdelco, since the last update, we're down roughly 4%. For the year, we're down 11%. The market is down 6%. We're underperforming by 5%. Before I go into Ai Weiwei's memoirs, I just want to talk a little bit about the market. We have basically, we're at the brink of a recession. This is what we feel on the street. This is what the markets are telling us. And the reason the recession is happening is because the COVID situation is not getting better. In fact, it's even getting worse. There is backtrack on many fronts, particularly on the front of people going back to work. And this applies globally, and it's different in different jurisdictions. In the US, it's, I would say, primarily driven by the fear of people, or by people using COVID as a pretext not to go to work and still get paid. In other jurisdictions, such as China, it's the other way around, where maybe people would want to go to work and have a normal life, but the totalitarian dictatorship just doesn't let them even breathe. Zero COVID policy and things like that are certainly not helpful for the economy. So we are in a situation right now where we are looking at people being insecure, maybe a little bit scared. Money is probably getting tight in some corners of the economy, not everywhere. But we have I would say it's more of a recession felt than actual recession in terms of actual money, people actually running out of money. So this is, in a nutshell, the way we see it. So there is certainly a correction in the market happening. How will this pan out? Of course, these things usually take their course until they turn around. The turnaround, we believe, has to come from the action on the political side, that we relax the COVID restrictions, that we get rid of the COVID bonuses that are all over the place. In other words, people not working, still getting paid. All these things have to stop. And also a relaxation of the COVID restrictions in places like China. We have to start living with the virus. We have to start treating it like a cold, like some people have alluded for a while now. In our opinion, that's the only solution out of this. We believe also that the interest rate environment will have to relax again. We cannot have higher rates in this type of situation. And the good news is that this all should bring a bit of an ease of inflation. But we could certainly see another 10% drawdown here before things turn around. Unfortunately, this is the way it is. Of course, we could have maybe predicted this and traded, but we are not a situational trading fund. So even though we might have had a view that the economy might turn around like this, the way we manage this is typically to keep our leverage low, and we don't trade around. And this, again, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And from our perspective, trading around these types of events, so meaning picking the peak of the market, selling and then buying when the recession is priced in the market or something like that, it's not our skill. It's doable. If you have the technology and the skill set to do it, you should do it. We don't have that skill set. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. So there is no mention here of timing or trading around recessions. We have to stick with fundamental new concepts and engineering practices, hope that the world doesn't completely fall apart. And in the meantime, these types of companies can generate wealth by doing exactly that, by disrupting new industries through fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. Now let's talk about Ai Weiwei. I think talking about disruption, talking about creativity, innovation, talking about the 0 to 1 concept of being unique, certainly Ai Weiwei, he fits into that category. He's an incredibly unique artist. He's an artist with a very specific eye and a very specific mission, driven by, I would say, an inner energy, an inner urge to rebel, to go against the authorities, against conventional wisdom, against all these things. So he would be a perfect 0 to 1 type artist. But before I go there, I don't want to shout out too much, because there's also things that I seriously have a problem with Ai Weiwei. And one of them is that I feel like, he grew up this is now according to his memoirs, as a young boy. He was within the cultural revolution. He was caught by the cultural revolution. His father was mistreated by the government. So he certainly felt the totalitarian government on his skin. And I feel like he himself has totalitarian tendencies. And this is one of the takeaways from the book, is that I feel like he is attacking the Chinese central government, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, for being complacent, self-righteous, entitled, all these things. But I feel like he has the same tendencies. I feel like there's a certain amount of entitlement also on his side, where he feels like he's important enough to raise his voice and attack the authorities on every possible. For example, there's a situation where a building wasn't constructed properly, there was an earthquake and people died. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a terrible event, and of course these things should be investigated. But who are you to go and constantly point out, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, this is wrong, that is wrong? There's a certain totalitarian entitlement that I feel comes also from his. And this is one of the insights that I have from this book. This is when you are an extreme anti-totalitarian person, then in a way you're totalitarian yourself. This is one of the things, it's very reciprocal. The opposite of totalitarian is not to be a rebel against totalitarian regimes, because the rebel against totalitarian regimes tends to be totalitarian as well. And this is what Robespierre was during the French Revolution. This is what Lenin became. This is what Mao became. All these people, they stood up against totalitarian regimes, but then they became totalitarian themselves. And I have a feeling Ai Weiwei is the type of person, if he was in power, he would also be a very totalitarian person. So my point here is that, yes, of course, I do applaud a lot of his totalitarian work, particularly as an artist. And again, as an artist, I am a big fan. I am a big fan of, as an artist, I think he steps in the footsteps of Duchamp, the sculpture Duchamp, and Beuys, and these types of installation artists, which I admire a lot. I have a lot of admiration. I want to talk about his art either at the end of this episode or maybe in another episode. This is more one of the takeaways from this book, which again, like I say many times, reading is conditioning of the mind. And this is something I never thought about in this way, that when you're exposed to totalitarian regime, you have two choices. One is three choices. You can play a ball. You can become basically a Stanford Prisoner's Dilemma type person that just becomes a prison guard, a Nazi, or somebody, let's say right now, who is just saying you have to wear a mask and get vaccinated, and if you don't do that, you're in misinformation and all that. So you just go with the flow. You can be indifferent to it and keep to your own thing, or you can rebel. And I think if you rebel, I think by almost by definition, and this is more anecdotal now, I can't prove this, but if you rebel, you are actually exactly the same thing as the thing that you're rebelling against. In other words, people who are attacking the Chinese Communist Party by rebelling against the Chinese Communist Party, they themselves have this totalitarian entitlement. Who are you to take the right in your own hand to rebel. Now, of course, this is a very slippery slope. Because, of course, on the other hand, you might say, well, listen, if nobody rebels, if everybody just keeps to themselves, then nobody's going to change. And that is, of course, a problem. But I would say there is also sort of the Gandhi way, the Nelson Mandela way of rebellion, which is very different. I would say Gandhi and Nelson Mandela are not totalitarian people. Václav Havel, these are not totalitarian people. And they also were able to withstand totalitarian regimes, and they also actually took over and even ruled over whole countries after the totalitarian regimes were replaced. So it doesn't mean that if you don't rebel, you can't get things done. This is my point. You can get things done. And I think Ai Weiwei, in my view, the more I read his memoirs, the more he's starting to get on my nerves. Like, why are you constantly pointing out these things? Why are you constantly nagging against the... There are problems with China, of course. There are problems with the United States. There are problems with everybody. But just constantly pointing the finger and you're bad, this is bad, this is bad. What's your solution? How do you suggest a country of 1.5 billion people should be run? What is the problem are you attacking? You're saying, oh, they don't have human rights. Fine, what is the alternative? Do we have human rights in the US? What is human rights in the first place? Look at how we're stamping on human rights now with COVID. Are you attacking the US? Are you attacking Biden? Are you attacking people like but when he was in New York in the 1980s, he was protesting for the rights of the homeless. Well, are you also protesting for the rights of the people who walk in the park and are molested by the homeless? I mean, where do you draw the line? Why do you always attack everything and don't offer solutions? Now, having said that, of course, I have to say, he is an artist. Ai Weiwei is an artist. And art is kind of the provocation to the conversation. And you can say, or he could say, look, all I'm doing is I'm opening up a chapter and I want people to think about it. This is my job as an artist. Fine, fair enough, that's true. But I feel like you're a political activist also, and as a political activist, I feel like you gotta have answers. If you say that, let's say this building collapsed because of an earthquake and there was corruption here and it's not okay, the buildings are built like that, I agree with all of these things, but what's your answer? What's your concrete solution here? How can we fix this? What do you suggest? And if you really think that something should be done, then start the business to build houses that are better. Attack, do the Elon Musk way. Don't just point fingers, do it, attack, and win. This would be my personal opinion about this. And I know I'm on a slippery slope. I could be misinterpreted here as somebody who actually doesn't like Ai Weiwei because he's attacking the Chinese Communist Party. Hence, the conclusion could be that I am actually pro-totalitarian regimes. This is completely non-true. I am absolutely against. I'm for freedom. I'm for free will. I'm for non-coercion. For me, the definition of a good government is a government that gets stuff done with as little coercion as possible. So I'm very much on the Popperian side of things. I'm just reacting to Ai Weiwei's memoirs, and this is a conclusion that I draw from the first 2/3 of the book. I haven't finished the book yet. But I feel like he himself, having been exposed to totalitarian regimes, has a totalitarian tendency as well. And this is something that I'm noticing across the board also in the United States. People have been, let's say, the left has been against people like Trump and the war and the industrial military complex of the United States. And now the left is in power, and now they're doing the same things. They're using propaganda. They're using words like misinformation. If you attack their policies with COVID, they're coercing us into doing all these COVID policies, which most of them are really not working. They're killing the economy. So there's a lot of negative things happening now on both on the left and the right. And this just shows that the rebels against the big man, the state, the man, they themselves also have tendencies to be the man. So what's the solution? I think the solution out of this is it goes back to fundamentally new concepts, engineering practices, freedom, creativity, innovation stack, 0 to 1, all these concepts that we believe in at Orange Capital Partners, I think can be applied also to politics. Stick to your own thing, do your own thing, do the right thing in a sense that, okay, define for yourself what you want to do, what your mission is. Don't step on other people's toes, and try to push as much as you can a fundamental new concept in engineering practice with large impact that you believe is good for you. And it doesn't have to be, there's no such thing as universal goodness or anything like that, but there is a Popperian way of competing for ideas, competing for things, and also competing in the marketplace with products and services. And I think just pointing out things all the time, pointing out and rebelling against things, at some point it becomes totalitarian itself. This is my point. This is my first impression of the Ai Weiwei book. There's, again, I'm going to talk more about it. It's a very good book, very, very interesting. Also a history of China, a history of the Cultural Revolution, a point of view of an artist. It's a lot about art, also art as a process of try and error, the same way that businesses, disruption, all these things are basically processes of try and error, processes of you know, you keep trying and you keep finding a niche in a sort of, it's a bit like evolution, where little biotopes create new niches for themselves, organisms grow in those biotopes, and then things grow out of there. The same way we see art, the same way we see business. So all these things are related. And I think Ai Weiwei's book is an incredibly interesting book. It's certainly worth a read, and it's also worth some criticism, like I said in this episode. Thank you.